Feel the waves cut through me, hypnotized by the sounds I'm breathing in. Hold tight, chemicals collide. Hold tight, hold tight, hold tight. Dripping lights paint the skies, all because of you. Dripping lights paint the skies, only you can make me move. You can make me move.
Welcome to Observer of Anomalous Objects. I'm Dale, and I truly appreciate you tuning in. You can also follow me on Spotify, TikTok, and Instagram. Just search for Observer of Anomalous Objects. You can also find me on X at DaleRob62. If you haven't done it yet, please hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and share it with others who are passionate about the unknown. And make sure that you tap the notification bell so that you'll never miss an episode. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Stanley Milford Jr., the Paranormal Ranger himself. Let's get into it. But first, let me read a short biography about Stanley. Stanley Milford Jr. is a retired Navajo Ranger who served the Navajo Nation for over 2 decades, where he became known for officially investigating paranormal incidents, including UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, and Skinwalker reports. Blending law enforcement with cultural sensitivity, Milford approached each case with a commitment to the truth and for the protection of his community. His work has been featured in documentaries, podcasts, and conferences across the country. Today, he is a sought-after speaker who brings a grounded tribal perspective to the global conversation on the unexplained. This is a perfect segue to bring Stanley Milford Jr. in, the Paranormal Ranger. Let me go ahead and bring him up on stage. Well, Stanley, I want to welcome you to the podcast, Observer of Anomalous Objects.
Thank you, Dale. Glad to be here.
I have so many questions for you. Let's go ahead and start with the first one. Can you describe how you became a Navajo Ranger and really help the audience understand what are the duties of a typical ranger? Because my understanding is that there really is no law enforcement in the country that does what the Rangers do.
Okay, so for me, started school at the University of Arizona, received a scholarship through the Indian Health Service, and received a full ride scholarship and had started school at U of A to study pre-med. So I had worked with the Parks and Recreation Department with the Navajo Nation for a number of years during my years in college, through junior college. So I had a really good working relationship with the director of the parks, who had contacted me while I was at U of A. And he said, Stan, he said, we're desperately needing a ranger for law enforcement services in the park areas on the Navajo Nation, places like Monument Valley and Four Corners and even Canyon de Chelly. I said, well, I already have a scholarship, a full ride scholarship to go to school, and I'll have to think about it. So I said, I'll let you know by next week if I can do, what it is you're wanting me to do. So, but secretly, I had, as a child, growing up in Northeast Oklahoma, between there and the Navajo Reservation. When I was a kid growing up in Oklahoma, I was playing cops and robbers with my cousin Rusty, who was about a year older than me. His father and mother managed a really large ranch. So him and I were running around that ranch on motorcycles and playing cops and robbers. And we'd be watching your fair share of cop shows, Adam 12 and Dragnet and SWAT, later on Starsky and Hutch. And I think these had influence on me to have a desire to work in law enforcement. At the point that I had the opportunity to go to the police academy, I knew that I was going to take that route. essentially that's what I did. And I contacted them next week, and I said, "Yeah, I'll take you up on that uh, to have them sponsor me going to the Federal Police Academy." So that's what I did. I went into the U.S. Indian Police Academy in 1997 and graduated at the top of my class. Ended up the first squad leader at the very end of graduation, and having even served as a platoon leader. And it was kind of destined, I think, for me to take that route. Graduated academy and came back home. I was given a badge and gun and sworn in, and began my career working in law enforcement for a little over 23 years, from ranger recruit to ranger sergeant, and on up the ladder to even chief ranger. I was delegated for a little over 2 years for the
So
Navajo.
you were basically born to be a Navajo Ranger,
Well,
basically.
yeah,
23 years, is that what it was?
a little over 23 total in law enforcement. A little over 30 years total working with the Navajo Nation. When I retired, I had a little over 30 years.
I have a kindred moment with you. In your book, you talk about, in the Paranormal Ranger book, you talk about a time when you were getting inspected by your drill sergeant.
Oh yeah.
And you were a squared away guy, but that doesn't mean anything. I think you said it in the book yourself. If they want to get you, they will get you. And so they had inspected your stuff, if I remember the story right. Couldn't find anything. So the drill sergeant comes back, takes his glove off, puts his thumbprint on the mirror, and then turns around to you and asks you, "Well, what about this?" And you knew better than to say that it was clean. And the reason I can relate to that is because when I was in the Navy and I was in boot camp, our drill sergeant came up to me during inspection, reached in my coat pocket, pulled out a cigarette butt, and told me to drop and give him 50. I don't remember if that's what happened with you, but I dropped and gave him 50 because even though I didn't smoke, even though it wasn't my cigarette butt, I'm pretty sure he planted it there. I knew better than to say it wasn't. I mean, those are things that you just knew, right, Stanley?
Well, that's the thing, when you're going through those type of academies, they're weeding out those people that are going to be asking, well, why this, why that, why, as opposed to those people that keep their mouth shut and do what they're told, following chain of command and taking orders. And so they're doing a process of weeding people out, which they did during that process. Yeah.
It's seeing those that will take their medicine and not complain about it, even if it's not fair. But I mean, that's a great lesson for life. If you think about it, life isn't fair. And so, even though
many
one
times,
of the things I always hated, but it made sense later, is if one person messed up, the whole company had to pay for it.
Everybody got in trouble.
Yeah, and
we had a few of those situations during our police academy too.
Well, and it's probably the same thing with law enforcement. But if you go to war and one guy falls asleep on watch, I mean, how many people might get killed because he did that? Or one guy makes a mistake, it's going to cost other people. And so it's a very good lesson. You don't understand it when you're in boot camp. I'm sure you don't understand it when you're in the police academy, but it makes sense later in life. You understand. Let me ask a question. How did moments like that shape your mindset for later dealing with strange or high pressure cases?
You're being faced with the unknown. You're going to work, seems like a regular day, and then all of a sudden you take a far left or right turn that takes you into a field of something that really and truly you're not prepared for. You just have to go in, like some military organizations, you have to adapt and to overcome. You really have to be flexible in your approach to a lot of these different things that you end up facing. And just like you said, you don't try to necessarily at the time analyze everything about it. You just have to go in and handle and deal with it. So
you just quoted a good old Clint Eastwood from Heartbreak Ridge. You got to adapt and you got to overcome.
Yeah,
I love that show. I think everybody's wondering this. How in the world, Stanley, did you go from being a Navajo Ranger to a Navajo Paranormal Ranger?
Well, It was after I had been assigned some of these cases that would fall under that umbrella of paranormal or supernatural. Not necessarily volunteering to head up this kind of work. Jonathan Dover, who was a lieutenant at the time, him and I were the ones that were tasked with overseeing this section under the special projects that would manage these paranormal supernatural cases.
You didn't volunteer, you were
John is saying we were voluntold that we were going to do these cases, and I kind of agree with him. It's one of those situations where there was a case that involved an elderly grandmother who she had sheep up in what was referred to as sheep camp in the high elevation. In the summertime, a lot of the elderly Navajos will herd their livestock up into the mountains where it's cooler up there. There will be a lot of fresh spring water for the livestock. And she was up there with her sheep and called the department saying that she witnessed one of these things that people refer to as a Bigfoot, stepping over into her sheep corral, picking up one of her sheep and running off with it. With the Navajo people, livestock that's the biggest source of income for many of the residents, and especially many elderly, traditionally. So it's very critical to them. So she called the department, and there were 2 young rangers that were assigned to go out and take the initial report and information from her. Unfortunately or fortunately, one of these young rangers was likened to a comedian in that everything he said and did, was a joke and laughing and carrying on. And, this was his personality. I don't think that he meant any offense to the grandmother or, to this particular case, but I don't think she took it that way. I think she was offended that, she felt he wasn't taking this case seriously. And here she was missing, one of her livestock. But she recontacted the department, spoke to the chief, and I'm sure as many Navajo grandmothers of Shema, she chewed the chief out and said, this is serious to me, and your officer's not taking it serious. So he convened a department-wide meeting and brought all of the approximately 40 rangers, commissioned rangers in, and he said, you've chosen a career in law enforcement, and that entails one of 2 things, if not both, and that's to help people and to protect people. And he said, that's what you're going to do in this job. He said, if you can't do that, the door is right there. And he was pretty stern about that. And he looked over at me and John, and he said, from now on, you 2 are going to manage these kind of cases. And John and I, already being part of, we headed up our SWAT team and special operations units and firearms instructors and a lot of specialized enforcement detail. And we said, yes, sir. And that's essentially how we ended up investigating those kind of cases. Again, it wasn't that we volunteered to be the Navajo X-Files or anything like that. It was simply we had a job to do, and we were assigned to do it. And as John says, we were voluntold, and we were going to do that. And we took it very seriously.
That's a new word for me. Voluntold. I have to use that because that fits the
John,
Navy as well. One thing, one thing I definitely can tell about your chief is that he took this stuff seriously. He didn't get 2 of the rookies out there and say, okay, you're going to go investigate these. We're going to, save our best officers for legitimate things. He basically gave, 2 of his top officers to go and investigate this. I think that's pretty impressive.
Well, John and I had headed up special projects. 9/11 the attacks, in New York City and Washington and Pennsylvania happened soon after the year 2000, and so there was a lot of changes in law enforcement. I mean, typically your natural resource officers, usually they don't have SWAT teams and special operations and things of that nature typically, but there was a change at a certain point, and coming from the highest level of the U.S. government, and we were tasked with training our personnel under what was referred to as NIMS, or the National Incident Management System, and ICS, Incident Command System, and adapting that to our SWAT operations and things of that nature. We had to be held accountable for what it is that our operations, what we were doing, and at times, we were doing a lot of different special functions. John and I were commissioned as Utah State Police at one point, and worked the Winter Olympics in 2002, special operations, and I did, John and I did dignitary protection for a lot of different celebrities, people like, I did security for the Lone Ranger and Johnny Depp's production that he had, and I did security for the band Metallica and things like that, over the years, and
So you had
it
a
was fun. It was
partner,
a very interesting career. I
right?
enjoyed it, but there were some harrowing moments at times, but you just relied on your training, that you focused on the mission at hand, and put your faith in your creator, and hopefully that got you through it. And it did for me for 23 years.
So you had a partner named John Dover.
Right.
What's the name of the podcast that you guys are doing later on today? Maybe we can plug that right now.
That's called the Paranormal Rangers with an S. That includes Jonathan Dover, myself, and a woman named Michelle Miners, who is an investigator of paranormal phenomenon, and we have developed a partnership and friendship over the years, and a trust among the three of us, and so yeah, together we now have a podcast that we've had for a little while now. It's gone through some changes, but it's under KGRA digital broadcast, and it's doing really well.
Well, I just want to give the audience a heads up that we're going to have John and Michelle on with Stanley as well in the
I
future.
talked to them. They're excited about that.
Okay. It's going to be a great podcast. And so it'll be nice to kind of get a holistic view of
Sure.
everything. Now, John was obviously your partner. Was there ever any time that you were alone, or did you guys both retire about the same time?
Well, there were a lot of cases, even at the time we were working together, that we would individually be assigned to cases. There was times that the chief assigned me alone to develop an investigation team, and he actually afforded me to be able to use investigators that specialized in paranormal investigation that were outside the department, simply because this wasn't something that typically fits under that umbrella of law enforcement investigation. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to put a Bigfoot in handcuffs, and I think he recognized the challenges and things like that, and he trusted John and I enough to be able to use common sense in these situations. I mean, we were dealing with SWAT operations where you were dealing with man with weapon, and where you had to use some good solid foundation and common sense and how to deal with these incidents, and he trusted us. So.
I think probably one of the biggest challenges of your job is the last name itself tells you, and that's Ranger. You were out there by yourself, and sometimes I think I read in your book, backup was an hour and a half away. And so you really had to use your wits, didn't you, to try to figure out, okay, do I engage this time, or do I back up, back off and wait for backup to show up? I mean, can you kind of maybe walk us through an incident where maybe that happened?
Sure. You know, over the years, our there was a partnership that the Rangers had in working with the Navajo police, who were under the Division of Public Safety. I mean, at times I was commissioned as a Navajo police officer too, working with the Drug and Gang Task Force, along with Navajo Police and FBI. But I always felt, as a Ranger, and especially as a firearms instructor, John and I had to train our personnel to a higher level of standard, because your use of force equipment, your sidearm and your shotgun and AR-15, at times that was your lifeline to get you and to be able to protect the public against all odds. So there were times, like I said in the book, where my backup and John and other Rangers backup was an hour and a half away. You have to realize the Navajo Reservation is 27,000 square miles, and that's thousand, not acres,
Right.
square miles. And so it's encompassing the biggest part of, the biggest part is in Arizona, and then New Mexico, then Utah, and then now even the state of Colorado. So that whole Four Corners region has Navajo lands or Navajo Reservation to it. So you had to be competent in being able to use your wits and common sense to mitigate whatever could come your way. Each and every day you were challenged with new things that you had to think outside the box to keep yourself safe and keep your community safe that you serve. The Navajo Reservation has about seven major communities, like the capital, Window Rock, and then Shiprock, and Chinle, and Tuba City, and Page, Arizona. So you have these major communities where you have concentrations of Navajo police and their districts. But further out on the reservation, like at the lake areas and park areas, we were the law enforcement for those areas, the scenic areas, Monument Valley and Navajo National Monument, Four Corners. You were the enforcement there. Sometimes you did have to take on that responsibility that included the public safety role, where, let's say, you come upon a domestic violence or a person under the influence operating a vehicle, or and you had to take action. You had to sometimes make arrests in those situations, and you couldn't simply wait for a Navajo police officer or others to come in and take care of that responsibility. You had to do it. So
Why don't you talk about the Res Rockets real quick and kind of update the audience with what that actually means as part of
well,
your job as well?
I'd heard that term res rockets over the years, and it's essentially I imagine an old beat up Impala that's has running four different treads of tires and held together by baling wire and duct tape, and backfiring every now and then. So it's really just for me, it's a visual image of some of these old beat up vehicles that were just put together with duct tape and baling wire and kept on the road. And so at times you would encounter those kind of vehicles out there on the reservation. But it was a challenge in that so you were encountering people that were operating vehicles like that had no license plate or insurance, and they're just the opposite. You were having people from Europe that were doing 120 miles an hour in a Maserati or a Porsche, or and you had elderly driving an RV that's wider than the road is or the highway is. So it was kind of a perfect storm in places like Monument Valley, because you mix in all of those different elements like that, and you would get in some cases, some really horrific accidents with fatalities and things of that nature. And so you had to be able to deal with it. And again, develop a good, solid partnership with the local district, Navajo police and county sheriffs and National Park Service and FBI and the the CSI for the Navajo Nation, criminal investigations. And so as a ranger, a lot of times you've seen it all. You had to deal with it all.
I find it interesting. I just watched one of the X-Files movies last night. And so in reality, you guys were the Navajo X-Files. That's what you guys did. You went out and saw that. Now, my question, we know how Mulder and Scully were treated, spooky Mulder, and they were looked down on by, at least in the movie anyway, or the series, as, kind of out there. How did other law enforcement peers respond to your involvement in the paranormal? Did they laugh? Did they question it? Or did they actually respect your work? Or was it a combination of all three?
Well, I think, it wasn't until sometime in and before about 2010 that John and I were approached by organizations like MUFON or Mutual UFO Network, their organization chapter out of the Phoenix area. John and I were reaching out to those organizations like that, and even Robert Bigelow's group out of Nevada that had investigators. Excuse me?
Was that NIDS or BASS?
Both of those.
Okay.
That already had investigators that were seasoned in a lot of these types of investigations of, anomalous activity. And so John and I had reached out to those organizations to meet and talk with them and talk about policies and approaches to the investigations, techniques, and all of that kind of stuff, because we were new to it. And like I said before, taking what you've learned as a criminal investigator at a law enforcement academy and trying to adapt that to investigating paranormal didn't always work. I mean, there was a lot of challenges, and so we were trying to educate ourselves with a lot of this. But
what about you? What about your peers, though? I mean, how did they look at you doing these investigations? Were they ones?
They weren't really privy to a lot of those investigations initially. I mean, I would dare say a lot of the old dogs with the Navajo Police and Navajo Rangers. I mean, today, recently was talking to one of the old Navajo Rangers, and a lot of them had these experiences and incidents and encounters that would fall under the umbrella of paranormal or supernatural, seeing objects in the sky and orbs and entities, that would be running by your vehicle at highway speeds, and just things that were really of a supernatural nature. And so a lot of them had those experiences, but for the most part, most agencies didn't readily acknowledge those events or incidents for the department. They a lot of times officers wouldn't talk about it, simply like your airline pilots that had encounters with UFOs or UAPs, or even military pilots. They didn't talk about it, for fear of being singled out and ridiculed, and in some cases probably, terminated from their jobs. And so you didn't talk about it. But for me and John, the fact that we were a part of an indigenous organization, that the supernatural is it's a part of the culture. You have these things that are referred to as shapeshifters, or lack of a better term, skinwalker. that are part of the culture. So it's interwoven into the culture. Sky people and things of that nature. So it's there because there would be cases that involved with those kind of things. My chief was one of those people that looked at these phenomenon and said, our people are encountering these experiences, and we're not going to ignore it. If they ask for help, we're going to provide the help, and that's what we did. So,
So very, very different approach than like law enforcement in America, or kind of where
yeah.
we have the media shaping us. We've got the government manipulating us into thinking that, that there's nothing to see here. It sounds like within the Navajo Nation, there's a lot more openness. Now, I have to ask this question that goes along with it: was there a difference between how the older people, the older law enforcement officers that you described, how they viewed your job, and the younger guys? Because I think at one point you didn't believe in any of this stuff either, right?
Well, actually, how I grew up, I would hear stories from both sides, from my mother's family, who my mother's from Tahlequah, Oklahoma, capital of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. So within Oklahoma, before it was named Oklahoma, it was Indian Territory, and so you have a lot of uh, Native American or indigenous tribes there. Almost all of them have versions of what is referred to as a shapeshifter or skinwalker. Not only that, but all other kinds of phenomenon. You have traditional healers referred to as medicine men or shaman that conduct ceremonies and have the ability to heal people. And so you have those elements within the cultures. So I think for older people, simply having more experience and more of an education by the elders, great grandparents and grandparents that taught a lot about various situations that involve uh, things that would be considered supernatural, or So I kind of grew up with experiences of my own that kind of solidifying the understanding that there's more to our world and the universe than what's right here in front of us.
Let's
Seeing
let's dig,
objects.
let's dig into that. Let's get
Sure.
into the paranormal and the UFO encounters. I think that's what everybody's excited about, because I mean you've got some stories to tell. You said some encounters defy explanation. Could you share one case that truly shook you, whether it was chilling, undeniable, or never fully resolved? Can you get just that one case that just still kind of haunts you?
So when it comes to
And save your Skinwalker encounter. That's the next one I want to ask you about. So don't make
when
it
it,
that one. Make it something else.
when it comes to UFO phenomena or UAPs, or there was an incident where Jonathan Dover and I were assigned to assist Navajo police and National Park Service to recover an individual that had alleged to have drowned in the San Juan River, which is a fast-moving river that is the northern boundary or border of the Navajo Reservation and the state of Utah. And so John and I had gone up to Page, Arizona at Lake Powell and put the department boat in the water, traversed that San Juan River. I think we had covered something like 70 miles, I believe, traversing up the San Juan River. We got there, to a point late in the evening where we come across a debris field. John was worried about damaging the prop and the transom. So he said, why don't we just pull off, this evening, and we'll camp out and we'll head back in the morning. And, I was fine with that. And him and I would always have all of the equipment and supplies to be out in the field for several days. And so we pulled the boat off and set up camp. And we were on the north side of the San Juan River facing the south or facing the reservation. And as it got dark, I happened to notice an object that was coming across the sky from the west, traveling west to east. And but the unusual thing was that this thing, whatever this was traveling in a rigid zigzag pattern as it came across the sky. When it got closer to the 12 o'clock position above us, I hollered at John. I said, "What is that? What is that object there?" And we both started watching it, and we could see that there was two F-16 fighters that were following in behind this object, relatively close behind the object. And these, John is a avid military buff, and he identified these as F-16s, and that they had their afterburners on and pursuing this particular object. And at one point, all of a sudden, this object accelerated from the 12 noon position all the way to the edge of the horizon in probably about a second and a half.
Wow.
And it maintained the zigzag pattern of flight, but it just left the F-16s basically.
Can you imagine the G-forces? Can you imagine the G-forces of doing something like that at that speed?
We talked to physicists and different people, aviators, that we estimate that it would have been up over 10,000 miles an hour to be able to achieve what it did. And seeing these kind of phenomenon with your own eyes,
Yeah.
There's nothing out there that I'm aware of, and with the people that I've talked to,
It's not.
that can definitively say, yeah, we have that kind of equipment in our arsenal. Yeah, there's black budget projects and things of that nature, but I've never been shown, clear evidence that we have that kind of capability. And so for these kind of objects in the sky, that was a moment that for me and John, that John has witnessed a lot of various UAP, UFO objects over the years, a lot more than I have. But that was one moment where it kind of just left me in awe.
Yeah, you can't explain that away. You know what I'd label that if I was you? If it was me anyway, it would be the eat my dust moment. It just took off. Now let's go ahead and let's hear about your Skinwalker encounter. I read about it in the book, and I'd love for you to share that with the audience, because that was terrifying. I mean, absolutely terrifying. So why don't you go ahead and share that with us?
Well, that particular incident, it did occur in my college years, in the years before I'd become a Navajo Ranger, but it did solidify my view on a lot of phenomenon that I would encounter later on. Growing up, in my youth, my father would fly me and my older sister to and from Oklahoma to, from Tulsa to Albuquerque each year during the summertime, during our school breaks. And we would fly out and spend, a number of years in the summers with our great grandparents and our grandparents and aunts and uncles and all our cousins. And we had, my father's family was quite large and still is, but we would spend time out there. And growing up, we would hear stories of these shapeshifters and the term Skinwalker. But for me, a lot of times I simply took that as kind of what is viewed as legend or folklore or that kind of thing. I can remember a few times when we were kids and there would be a so-called sighting of one of these things at night when all us kids would be playing after dark, and we'd be running in all directions, when somebody says Skinwalker, Skinwalker. But this incident occurred when I was in my college years. I'd gone to the movies one night, borrowed my sister's little Mitsubishi sports car, and had gone to watch the Stephen King movie. That I had gone simply because there was a soundtrack to this movie by the band AC/DC. And I've always been, my mother bought me a guitar when I was like 9 years old. And I always was very influenced by hard rock and heavy metal. And so I was going really for the soundtrack. The movie was entitled Maximum Overdrive. So it was a horror movie. And the movie got out in and after, a little bit after midnight. I'd gone to Window Rock to watch the movie and by myself. And when I'd come into the lobby after the movie, there was an elderly man sitting there in the lobby on one of the little benches over along the wall. Him and I struck a conversation, and he ended up asking me if he could catch a ride back to the town that I was from, which was Fort Defiance. And it's 7 miles from Window Rock to Fort Defiance. And I said, sure, I can take you. He appeared, in his maybe 80s, mid 80s, quite elderly, and so I took him to this out near Fort Defiance on a long stretch of highway, and it was very dark. There was no street lights or ambient lights out there, no residents, in and that at that time, and so I said, "Are you sure you want out here? Because it's pitch black out here." And he said, "Yeah." And I dropped him off and turned around and started back on this long stretch of highway. As I was driving, there was a right-of-way fence along the highway, but there was something that caught my eye, movement on the inside of the right-of-way fence. And so as I was driving, I would glance through the passenger side of the vehicle, looking over to see what was moving out there on the range or on the inside of right-of-way. And this thing was keeping up with me as I was approaching a highway speed. And pretty soon it managed to jump over the right-of-way fence, and it got closer and closer and closer to the side of the passenger vehicle. And I'm trying to see what this is, and it's not making any sense. That initially I might have thought, maybe this is a horse that's on the right-of-way within the inside of the right-of-way fence. But this thing jumped the fence, which really didn't make any sense. But it got closer and closer. Pretty soon it was within several feet of the side of the passenger vehicle, and I would take it that the lights from the side of the headlights and the running lights on the side were helping to illuminate what this was, because it was solid white head to toe. And the back of this, it was running on all fours, and its back come up over the side of the vehicle. I would say a good 4 feet, 4.5 feet, or something like that. Canine in appearance, it looked like similar to what we see today as a greyhound, like we see in these dog race parks that run the oval tracks. And it looked like that, similar, but it was bigger, and it had more of a barrel chest, and it did have a canine head, long snout. I do remember that it had a lot of very sharp, jagged teeth. At one point, I glance over at this, and our eyes lock. And its eyes are the color, the orange color of what we see with these emergency exit signs, like at the movie theater or other places like that. It's that fiery orange look, and these eyes were like they had their own illumination or self-illumination. This look, it encapsulated the idea of something evil to me. So at one point when I did lock eyes with it, it was shocking to see this thing. It wasn't that it was like some type of apparition or spirit, or it was like a solid physical manifestation, solid physical animal. So at that point, I had seen this. I slid down in the driver's seat as low as I could, still being able to see over the steering wheel and over the dash. And I floored it. I didn't look back at it. I didn't look back in my rear view mirrors. I don't know what it did, at that point. That road comes to a T intersection. I think at the time there was a stop sign there, but I don't know how I made it around it because I think I was probably flying at the point that I reached that intersection. Come sliding into the driveway, gravel driveway at home, and jumped out, ran inside, and I was kind of out of breath. And my dad was still awake, still up. He was watching TV, and so he inquired, what's wrong with you? What happened? And I described what I'd seen, and he told me, yeah, that's a skinwalker, what you witnessed.
So is there any chance it was that 80-year-old guy? That probably suspect number one?
I almost always hear that inquiry. For me, it could simply be like that of a flipping a coin. It could be one or the other. There was nothing that indicated, or suggested that in our conversation. He simply talked like an elderly Navajo man. There was no ill will or anything that was conveyed by him during our travel.
Did he talk at all during the conversation, during the drive?
He did talk, but you have to realize that most people at that age, uh, they talk very little English. Most older Navajos, I mean, some of them do, but most don't. And I talk very very little Navajo language, and so I don't know. It could have gone either way. I have a lot of people suggest maybe he was, and you know, it it could be either or.
Well, the fact that you dropped him off out in the middle of nowhere, that's the kind of freaky part to me. And then you see this skinwalker later on. I'm just like, well,
Well,
A and B may equal C, but then again, maybe not.
you have to take into consideration that how widespread and spread out the Navajo reservation is, and for the most part, there isn't a lot of street lamps and ambient light. There's more today, you know, lighted areas in the communities and stuff, but at that time it was fairly rare.
But was there anything
And
out there where you dropped him off at? Was there any houses or anything like that?
there were houses in that region, but very sparse. I mean, a lot of the elderly Navajos still live in the traditional Navajo hogan, or the eight-sided, what is referred to as the female hogan. There's also a male hogan that is used for various ceremony purposes, but the female hogan is like a log cabin, but it's eight-sided, and you'll still see that today on the Navajo Reservation. It's a traditional uh, home of the Navajo.
It just seems like if he was going to one of those locations, why wouldn't he just have you drive him there, drop him off at that house or whatever, and then you turn around and leave? But that's not exactly what happened, is it?
No, but there again, a lot of those, once you get off the highway, those dirt roads can get extremely
Okay.
rough. You would have a lot of people have pickup trucks and to get in and out of those, and we were in my sister's sports car,
Yeah, so that makes
so,
sense and stuff.
so that's
Now,
in,
yeah. Now, you and I talked about this. I think a lot of people in our audience are familiar with the secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. And so we know that the Utes and other tribes also believe in skinwalkers. But I learned something, and you and I talked about this. It actually came from a friend of mine named Caesar, who owns a Mexican restaurant here in town where I live.
yeah.
But he told me about the Nahal. I'm going to pronounce it that way because I refuse to butcher this name over and over again. So I think
Yeah.
you and I both agreed to call it Nahal. It's actually Nahual, in case anybody wants to research it. But
Yeah.
according to Mexican tradition, this is how they view it. And when I hear it, it sure sounds like there's some parallels between Skinwalkers and the Nahals of the Mexican tradition. In fact, in one section, they're described as shapeshifters or sorcerers. And this is what it said. It said, in some traditions, a Nahal is a shaman or sorcerer who can transform into their animal form, particularly at night. This transformation might be used for spiritual travel, healing, or in darker stories, mischief or harm. This version of the Nahal is similar to a werewolf in folklore, but rooted in indigenous cosmology. Some other Nahal animals include jaguars, owls, coyotes, and eagles. The ability to shapeshift is often said to be inherited or initiated through rites and training. And so, can you expand on that? Does that sound similar to the Skinwalker? What might be different? What might be the same?
Well, yeah, there are similarities. You have to understand that here in the United States, I think there's something like 574 Native American tribes, and Canada, another 600 First Nations peoples, and those indigenous peoples to Mexico and other countries around the globe. And a lot of those cultures have references to these entities that are capable of shape shifting from a human form into that of an animal and vice versa, back and forth. I mean, you have a lot of references like that of the Nahal, the Wendigo, that's a reference to the northern tribes in the United States, and First Nations people. That also is has some of the similarities referred to in shape shifting. If you went to Europe, this idea of lycanthropy or werewolves, so to speak, that have been really featured in within the motion picture industry here in the United States, werewolves and even characters like Bram Stoker's Dracula and vampires, where essentially they are shapeshifters in nature, changing from a human form into that of an animal and back and forth. I recently watched movie Nosferatu that come out not too long ago, and you look at that when you looked at it from a shape shifting viewpoint, there are a lot of similarities, and even with the werewolf references and stuff. So, and with those cultures like those in Europe that have the uh, tales of the werewolves, it's a very real to those cultures. Uh, you look at some of the gypsy cultures and things of that nature, and it's as real today as it was 100 years ago or more, further back in history. So I think there's something to that. It's just like the references you and I hear today about orbs, references to orbs with that of UFOs and UAPs, but also orbs associated with Bigfoot and orbs associated with hauntings and a lot of different phenomena, supernatural cases and phenomenon. And so each, around the globe, there are different references. It's the same with the Sasquatch and Bigfoot and Yeti and Yowie, and you know so it just depends on where you're standing and the culture that you're in, that a lot of these references are made, and some of them going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. So
Yeah, we didn't talk about this earlier, but I want to make sure I don't have you on too long. we're at an hour mark. I mean, I can keep going, and I'd like to keep going, but
Sure.
I don't want to interfere with your podcast coming up.
No, we're good.
Okay. All right. So I'll try to wrap it up in 2 hours if you're good with that, because I think we got enough to talk about to cover the other hour, as long as you can do that.
Yeah.
Now, I have a question,
Sure.
and it comes out from watching the series, The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
I noticed that a lot of First Nation people or Native Americans, they will not use the word skinwalker. And so why is this taboo so strong in Native American culture? Will they use the English word skinwalker, but not the Native American word for it? Is that how it works? Or will they not use it? A lot of them, period.
Well, for the Navajo, the word skinwalker is closely attached to that culture. When the term skinwalker comes up, there is that association to the Navajo culture and Dene culture. Dene is the term used by originally by the Navajo people. That's what they refer to, as opposed to Navajo, which is a term that was given by Spaniards of the Navajo. So, but so because this is viewed as a part of the witchcraft or black use of black magic, so to speak, there's an understanding that these things are capable of working within other dimensions, other space and time that's overlapping to our physical world that you and I are in right now at this moment. But many times simply saying that word, I avoid saying that word, after dark, simply because I don't want these energies and entities focusing in on me and on the fact that I said that word, and
Is that
so I
like
think
inviting them? Is that like inviting them
yes,
in?
it is very much so.
Okay.
So I think with the Navajos are very utilitarian. So it comes out of a need. Let's say if you look at the Navajo back in the 40s and 50s and even before then, out on the Navajo reservation, you had few hospitals. Today, there's a taboo with snakes, and especially, rattlesnakes. And I think that was out of, simply on the Navajo reservation. If you got bit by a rattlesnake out in the middle of nowhere, it could be a life-threatening situation. So the culture kind of built that taboo and against snakes for that very reason. So the same with the witchcraft. Typically in the 40s and 50s, Navajos, after dark, they were in the Hogan. The door was shut, and you were in for the evening. You weren't out venturing around unless there was a really serious need to be out there, because out there in the darkness is where witches and shapeshifters and all of that's where they were doing their work. So you were inside and confined to indoors early on, and I think that was for a reason. So